Well, hi, welcome everybody. It's Snoo. Today I'm going to talk to you about defensive layers. Why? Well, I keep getting asked questions in the Twitch chat as I'm playing the game, doing these really crazy hard tier 17 content. People come in all the time, say, hey Snoo, how are you surviving this right now? What's going on? If I did the exact same thing, my character would immediately drop without an aura bot. How are you taking so little damage? So, I am, of course, glad to answer that question on the go while trying to play. Very short, quick, and dirty answer. But today, I realized it would probably do the community a service if I made a video that could be referenced in some way that just kind of showcase all the various different defensive layers that my character currently has. And this is going to include many, or most of them probably, that are allotted to a Deadeye especially, because that is the character I'm playing, and otherwise glass cannon archetype. So it can be kind of confusing to a lot of players, especially those of you who are typically playing the more tanky version, like a Juggernaut, for example, is a tanky archetype character. Might confuse you a little bit on how I'm able to get so much survivability on a glass cannon archetype character. I don't want to confuse you. I don't want to mislead you. This character is absolutely not tanky in the most wholesome sense of the word, but the Deadeye does have a lot of tools in her arsenal that she can use to help beef her up beyond, just a very stereotypical magic find glass cannon Deadeye, because that kind of gameplay, that sort of style of building a character, is getting harder and harder these days as the game is beginning to get more challenging. This league especially, we're not given much in the way of power creep, but maps were given a lot of power creep, shall we say, with the new tier 7 system. And I'm currently able to solo content that is typically reserved for group play, or at least thought of in terms of like duo group play stuff. We're talking Shaper, All Flame, Shaper Touched, Curation, All In Juice farming. The new Scarab Meat Sacks farm that I recently came out with is another example of a farm that's very difficult to pull off on a character which is solo. Of course, there are some archetypes, some builds that can do it much more easily. Difficult to do for a bow character solo for sure. So we're just going to go over all of the defensive layers on my character through the path of building here. I got the entire laundry list written down. It's a much bigger list than I expected. I'm glad I wrote it down. And then after that, I'm going to open up the media player because I pre-recorded a little bit of a map that I entered. It was Shaper, All Flame, Shaper Touch map that showcases some of the most difficult content that you can do in the game, mapping-wise, where you absolutely have to have some decent amount of defense to pull it off. So I hope this video can help you, maybe inspire you to incorporate, a defensive layer or two that maybe you hadn't thought about that could unlock the next level of gameplay for you. Or, if nothing else, just kind of educate you on certain things that you might not have been aware of at all. This game is, of course, incredibly complex, and it can be hard to find any kind of resource that really just cuts down all the different possible ways to make a character more survivable, I guess. So, from the top, we're going to give you the list here, and then we're just going to go over them in detail in the path of building. We're going to start with least specialized to most specialized. From the very top, this is a life-based character, so life, of course, maximum life is a major defensive layer in and of itself. We have resistances, naturally. Every class, I think every class cares about resistances. Evasion, because I'm playing a Deadeye, so, I'm not focusing on armor, I'm not focusing on ES. Evasion is going to be the go-to there. Spell suppression, highly associated with the Ranger class, of course. Then we have, getting into a little bit more specialized stuff, I got Petrified Blood, combined with Progenesis. Physical damage taken as cold or lightning or fire or even chaos is another defensive layer. I have that. Maximum resist even, which is not typically associated with the Deadeye, but there is a little bit of that as well. Then we have endurance charges, as well as the combination of endurance charge and Immortal Call. Great synergy there. We have crit reduction, critical hits or critical damage taken reduction, if you will. And we have skills like Berserk. And we have Curse, Enfeeble. And then getting into really high specializations, we have the Ascendancy Point Windward. And in my case, this league, a first time ever, the Divinity buff, which comes from the chest garb of the Ephemeral, and actually has quite a bit of defensive layers built into it. As an honorary mention, I should mention recovery, of course, and the best form of recovery is Leech, Instant Leech in particular. No build can survive without some form of recovery. I don't care how much tankiness you build into it. You need to have some kind of recovery, regen, leech, life on hit, something like that, or else your build will eventually die. So my character does have a reasonable amount of instant leech. That is through the mastery here. And I'm getting some leech in Fuel the Fight and Feed the Fury. Some mana and life leech. So just an honorable mention, get that one out of the way. Let's start from the top. We got life from the start. So I'm running a Magified character. I have 42% quant and some rarity. Very typical to have not a whole lot of life on this kind of character. So my character is mirror tier right now. And most of the mirror tier qualities of the build go into offense more than anything. But some of it goes into beefing up the character's life pool, especially. Where it can be done. And I'm taking life anywhere I can. Basically everywhere I possibly can. I got Peak Vigor as a notable there in the cluster. You know, we got Herbalism. We got Thick Skin. Got a couple of the relevant masteries here. To go and take Heart of the Oak. Can't take the one that's here because I'm using Elegant Hubris. Still taking Hired Killer. Revenge of the Hunted. So getting life essentially anywhere and everywhere I can. However, you will notice on the gear, there is very little life on the gear. I'm using all of my armor and jewelry is exclusively unique. And most of it doesn't have life on it. So it's a tall order to get a lot of life. So I'm quite happy with 3,600 life. I like to have 4,000, but that requires some more rares gear. But anyway, that's the life pool we're starting with. And we have resistances as well. You can see the resistance number is very high. That is because you got a couple flasks that are on, and then we got endurance charges here. The config is currently set up for bossing. If everything were enabled off the start, I prefer to be resistant cap technically without any buffs in the hideout. This is how much I have without any buffs. And so now we're going to put the endurance charges and get a couple flask charges or flasks set up back up and running. Evasion, we're going to talk a little bit more about this one because running back through the gear again, what you may not have noticed the first time through is that I get very, very little evasion on gear. However, we can see that I have 36% evasion. And if I have taken a hit recently, I'm actually evasion cap. Unbelievably. Evasion cap with almost none on gear. So what's going on there? Evasion cap is a very popular thing to hit and can give you a lot of survivability. That in and of itself is not enough. You definitely need some mitigation somewhere. But it does prove to be an incredibly strong defensive layer when capped. So let's uncheck this here. And first things first, of course, I'm getting a lot of evasion from Grace. Grace is an aura, giving me a huge amount of evasion at level 21. I have the other ore that's associated with evasion. It's not exactly evasion, but that is right here, Dread Banner, which acts as evasion. It is calculated into the path of building here. It does give you quite a bit extra. It's reserved on the life side. Then we have a Watcher's Eye, as we get a little bit more specialized. Not everybody can get this, but having evade attacks as a Watcher's Eye mod is very strong. And I have it because it helps enable me get to cap. But the last thing I'm doing is I'm taking Wind Dancer. So I get, that is why this number goes from a respectable 86%, nowhere near cap, all the way to cap. Now, I'm not a big fan of Wind Dancer in general, but if it is the difference between 86 and 95, that sort of number threshold difference, that's a really nice place to be. And I will take it in that case, likely, especially if it's just 1 point there on the large wheel. So that's where I'm getting all the evasion from. And of course, I steal Headhunter buffs too. And in the defensive layers, you know, somebody's probably going to say in the comments if I forget to say this. So yes, Headhunter is a huge defensive layer as well. And it's right here. You can look up online to see all the stolen Headhunter buffs. However, it is not the be-all, end-all, and it alone is nowhere near enough. It used to be a long time ago, but by itself, nowhere near enough. You have to go out of your way to do a lot of things on the character now. So, of course, moving on, we got Spell Suppression. I've taken Inveterate. I've taken Entrenched. I got a Mastery here, and I got the Mastery here. Well, look, if I take this off, I'm nowhere near cap. So it is a defensive layer, but very good point allocation, expense to benefit ratio can be achieved by not going all the way into Spell Suppress cap, and instead just trying to get a decent number and then relying on spell suppress chance lucky to finish it all the way, and therefore you can allocate some of your passive points for something else like damage or defense in some other form. Something I've become more comfortable with over time. Back when Spell Suppress first came out, everyone thought it was the be-all, end-all. You must get Suppress Cap. I'm here to tell you that's not necessarily the case. You should try to diversify your defensive layers a little bit if possible. But in some cases, sacrificing Suppress Chance for offense, totally valid. Next up, we have Petrified Blood. Again, Petrified Blood is to enable Divination Distillate, and it makes the flask the only thing that allows my health to go up above half life. It allows me to leech permanently, which is very beneficial for these two cluster masteries. And let's see. I'll find it over here in the skills. I have Arrogant support here, and this is converting some of my life, a total of 63% life remaining, so 13% above the halfway point. Very important to see. But if we go into Petrified Blood, you can read it here. And you see that it gives me almost 50% damage reduction. About 40% damage reduction sends me down to half life. So that's a net negative in and of itself. But when it's paired together with Progenesis, and honestly, Progenesis just by itself is incredibly strong. I get to take way less damage instantly from hits, and I get life drain instead. Now, this can prove to be quite potent whenever you're stuck at half-life, and then you're dealing with hits damage as well as incoming damage over time. Can be rough, but in terms of survivability, you can anticipate the damage taken much more cleanly or easily if it's not coming all at once, and you can kind of plan for it, maneuver around, or do something, react in some way. You at least have time to react in some way. If the greater threat is damage over time than it is incoming hit-based damage. And so that's why it's an incredible defensive layer, and that's why Progenesis costs an arm and a leg. Well, also because it doesn't exist on a Divination card yet. I would expect Divination card on Progenesis next league. Probably going to be the case. Anyway, moving on. Next defensive layer is physical damage taken as. All right, so we have that on the Taste of Hate. I have 10% increased effect of Flask. So this is a very popular flask, very strong flask. People love this flask for the defensive layer. Some people use it just for the defensive layer, even though it comes with a huge offensive bonus for Phys physical conversion-based builds, which mine is. So I'm lucky I get both sides of the benefit of Taste of Hate. But anyway, 15% physical damage taken as hits as cold is going to give me a lot of extra defense when the cold resistance is capped. And I also have Guard the Ephemeral with a synth implicit. That gives me 10% physical damage. It's taken as lightning. So, you could run a lightning coil, for example, and have way more defense in terms of Phys taken as. Comes with the downside of lightning resist, the main reason why I didn't do it. But I can use this chest because I'm running an Elegant Hubris with Supreme Ostentation. So I'm at liberty to use this very unusual chest. This is definitely the most off-meta thing I'm doing this league. First time ever using this chest as part of the core build. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the pure 5% reduced damage taken if corrupted. And that is truly one of the biggest forms of damage reduction because that is just straight up against every type of damage. Every element, chaos, physical, damage over time, hits, attacks, spells, doesn't matter. 5% reduced damage taken. Crazy strong by itself. So that is currently my favorite synth implicit on the chest because I like taking less damage. So that's actually an extra bonus defensive layer I didn't technically mention before. But that's it for the Phys taken as. Just those two sources there. And then we have max resistance, which is not playing a big role here. It's simply from the Taste of Hate, and that's why the max resist is 80 when it's up. So with another 10% flask effect, it would be 81, but that's okay. It does prove to be quite useful against the Shaper Beams, but more on that later. We got Immortal Call and Endurance Charge. All right, so this is one of my personal favorites. I've been doing this for a long time. This is how I built extra defense into the Glass Cannon archetypes, even before it was really needed. You guys might remember the good old Darasol's Defiance, Worm Sign, Immortal Cast and Damage Taken, Immortal Call. A terrific combo. Well, I'm not using Darasol's Defiance now, or Worm Sign anymore now. However, I still love Immortal Call, Cast and Damage Taken, and with endurance charges in particular. So yes, I have endurance charges. I actually have 4 endurance charges. Deliberately got the +1 max endurance charge there on the boots. That gives resistances, but I don't really care about that. Endurance charges for the reduced damage taken, reduced physical damage taken in particular. And then Immortal Call pairs up with it nicely. It exists right here. Connected to an enhance, makes it even stronger, more reliable. And paired with a reliable endurance charge acquisition makes it stronger as well. So basically doubly enhanced Immortal Call. Only level 4, but that doesn't really matter much because it's giving me a huge reduction of damage regardless of the level. So that's why low level is better here with the cast from damage taken. Don't have to take too much to get that in. And this proves to be extremely strong, especially when paired with Wind Dancer. So this is a defensive layer that I don't usually have, being evasion capped effectively, but being very vulnerable to hits the moment I get hit, except reversing that vulnerability into tankiness, essentially, for the time that I have been hit. And so if the entropy system, the evasion entropy system, were to fail me within the recently window, 4 seconds, I'm still going to have endurance charge up, or I'm still going to have Immortal Call up, is what I mean to say. And that's going to prove to be extremely beneficial. And that's one sort of major, snippet to you about how I'm able to survive incoming hits, even when I'm getting hit a whole bunch at once by meat sacks or whatever. So Immortal Call with endurance charges. How am I getting endurance charges, you might wonder? Well, there are a few different ways. You can get it through a small cluster, which I don't recommend because that removes a jewel slot, which is usually going to be better used somewhere else. You can get it on the synth implicit on the chest, which is a tall order since most of you can't wear the chest. Or you can get it on an Elegant Hubris, notable right here, like this. So I've swapped back and forth between, the notable here or the chest. You can also even anoint it. You can get it all the way down here, potentially, if you want. There is a way, there's a few different ways. Worm Sign Worm Sign doesn't give you any, but, Darasol's Defiance, that's a chest, can also give you some as well. So there are a lot of different ways to get endurance charges. You can research endurance charge on the wiki if you want to figure out a way you want to do it. But anyway, that's how I'm doing it this time around. And by the way, not all forms of endurance charge are equal. Endurance charge on kill, for example, is nowhere near as good, in most cases, nowhere near as good as gain an endurance charge every second you've been hit recently. Because as you can see, as that functions, Immortal Call triggers, procs, removes all endurance charges, lasts longer time. By the time an Immortal Call falls off, I already got 2 or 3 endurance charges again. And I'm susceptible, or becoming less susceptible as Wind Dancer kicks back in to its phase 1 of how it works, I suppose. So anyway, all that working together, I want to spend a little extra time on that because it is important to understand how that's working. And that's a lot of actual mitigation. This is the real power of the Deadeye, being able to use creative ways to mitigate damage while relying mostly on avoidance. But you don't want to go all in. Just do the evasion with none of the other things I'm mentioning there. That's not going to work out too well in the end, especially in Tier 17 maps. All right, so next we have Crit Reduction. Now, this is a special one. A few different places you can get this. You can get it as a mastery point. You take 30% reduced extra damage from crits. Very popular there. I didn't have to do that. You can get it as a corruption on the chest. Very popular place to do it. These Tier 17 maps will come out with something like 2,000% increased critical strike chance from the monsters. I mean, you will get crit, for sure, in Tier 17. Most of the time, fortunately, they happen only in terms of nearby. Now, when you have Headhunter buffs, nearby is actually extended quite far out. But you can also steal the Headhunter buff crit resistant, which will help give you a lot of survivability. But anyway, I have nearby enemies cannot deal critical strikes. This works out really well. I'll take a second here to address the top, the line above this. Nearby allies' action speed cannot be modified below base value. I wish I got that. That would be great. But if I'm personally wearing this chest, okay, not an animate guardian, if I'm personally wearing it, then I don't get that benefit. But I do get nearby enemies cannot deal critical strikes still. So very good, especially against the meat sacks with crit mod rolled on Tier 17. Absolutely makes a difference between life and death in those scenarios. So very, very good to have crit reduction if you can. Lastly, we had the blue wisp power, and that was cranked up really high and monsters would crit like crazy. Last league, my answer to this issue was this mastery plus 50% corruption on the chest. And that was a total of 80%. And that was enough to survive okay. Not sure about this in tier 17 maps. Now, another defensive layer I like that I've been using a lot is Berserk. I've been doing Warlord's Mark, Cast on Crit, Warlord's Mark, Mana Forge stuff. Right now, I've moved over to the Helmet because the Helmet proves to be a very good source of rage. And while, of course, another question I get asked a lot is, so why are you using this Helmet when the rage is benefiting spellcasters, not attacks? That's true. I don't really care about the rage. I still get the movement speed from it, by the way, but I don't really care about the rage. I care about the Berserk, the effect of Berserk. And so that is a much more important buff than the rage itself. And the Berserk still works just like it normally does. There's no conversion of that over there. So Berserk is right here. And my God, I mean, this is just crazy how much more damage, more attack speed, more movement speed, and 20% less damage taken. That is the major kicker. Also, very, very good idea to put this connected to an enhance if you can. If not, it's okay. Cooldown reduction recovery maps are really rough with this. I don't recommend those kind of maps with this setup. But anyway, Berserk, very reliable because I'm spending a lot of mana, 21 mana each attack. And, you know, I have these gloves, so I'm attacking incredibly fast with Soul Eater, recovering a lot faster too. And so these gloves combined with this helmet, which I made a video on separately, give me a ton of recovery and keeps Berserk's uptime high. So this is a very reliable defensive layer. Not up 100% of the time, but you feel a major difference when it is up. Moving on, we got Enfeeble. Enfeeble is a curse. I did not expect to have this defensive layer. This is the first time I've ever ran with Enfeeble on this archetype, but felt like it was necessary, or not, it was a good idea to do so. Actually, I'm going to come clean with you guys. What really happened is I wanted these gloves with a critical strike roll, and there were a few pairs up there with perfect rolls, but there was only one that was cheap, and that was with cursed enemies Enfeeble on hit, which bricks the build because then my Sniper's Mark doesn't work unless I have an extra curse, which I realized, well, tier 17s are hitting me pretty hard. Wouldn't be a terrible idea to include Enfeeble. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Enfeeble would be maybe the best curse I could possibly have in this given situation with the current game. So that was my solution, in part, to making my build more survivable in tier 17 map. I would like to put a different anoint on here, but hey, do what you can. And I got plenty of reservation. I don't even have an enlighten on, so I ended up dropping another 50% aura or something that I would normally be running. And this worked out totally fine. So that is a very potent defensive layer. Enfeeble, well, can we see where it goes? Anyway, it's like 10% reduced damage done by rares and uniques, and even more so on magic and normal monsters. So think of it as a 10% damage reduction, effectively. Now, into the highly specialized things, we have Windward. Okay, Windward is all the way over here. Now, the Deadeyes typically never take this ascendancy point, and I don't recommend it on most builds, in most leagues. However, again, adjacent to the defensive layer, I'm going to mention these gloves again. Incredibly beneficial gloves on a defensive front, which in ways you wouldn't necessarily think about. This ascendancy point has issues because if you're not evading enough, and attacking too slowly, you won't really get much use out of this. You can kind of see how that would be the case, right? Because the Gale Force is sort of the tailwind booster there, right? Up to 10 stacks, up to 30% less damage taken. However, if you're evading a lot and you're attacking extraordinarily quickly, this ascendancy becomes really potent. Really potent. And it even promotes a playstyle where you actually stand your ground and just fire away. This is something I like to do on the meat stacks farm, especially, where meat stacks are all wailing away at me. They can't do much damage because they can only hit 5% of the time with the entropy system, and by the time they hit again, I'm going to have 30% less damage taken again. Another big thing about Windward that is incredibly good is that it is a full-blown net positive for damage over time taken. When you're running Petrified Blood, your health is cut in half. Okay, Petrified Blood again, just to pull it up here. Health cut in half, so suddenly I'm dealing with half my health pool. This is okay because I take way less damage from hits. But you've heard many people talk about probably Petrified Blood is a severe downside when it comes to damage taken over time from poison, corrupted blood, from bleeds, from Progenesis, from Petrified Blood itself, the degens that come from that, from ground effects, from Searing Exarch runes, anything like that can be really potent. Cirrus Awakener patches can absolutely prove to be deadly. They're already deadly, even when you have an entire max full life pool. Well, this Ascendancy helps tremendously against all of those things, because I don't lose the buff when I walk over a Searing Exarch rune. I keep the 30% damage reduction. And so it's just completely net positive. So very good Ascendancy. I think a lot of people sleep on it. It's not really been that necessary up until this time, because you typically just get away with having less defense. You don't need to take a Deadeye to get a defensive bonus. When people play this class, they're not thinking about defense anyway. They're usually just going all in, focal point, gathering wins, ricochet, endless munitions, far shot, pick 4 of the above, and Windward doesn't even enter the conversation. But I'm telling you, this is a really strong one, and it's one thing that very obviously specific to the Deadeye, and a uniquely powerful defensive layer that she does have that can be used. When you've set up the build in a way where you're going evasion, this is one of my major motivations, because it essentially double dips in concept with Wind Dancers, something like Wind Dancers. So once I get hit, I really, really don't want to get hit again soon, because then my Windward buff is going to drop again. Right, and if my Windward buff drops and then I'm also taking 20% more damage, holy cow, that's a deadly situation if I've ever seen one. Good thing I'm doing Immortal Call with endurance charges and that whole side of things to help correct the issue of, building the defensive layers through evasion focus, so to speak. Having the mitigation on the other end of that equation is how all of this total package comes together, and it proves to be extremely defensive. Even for this, again, glass cannon character. All right, the very last thing to talk about is Divinity. Now, Divinity, you'll have to look it up on PoE Wiki if you want. Divinity is a buff. These charges go up 1 second internal cooldown, and then the buff lasts for 10 seconds. Now, the buff from this chest gives you 50% more elemental damage done. So, post-conversion, fine. I'm a physical to cold conversion build. 50% more damage on an armor is bloody incredible. Even if it's up only half the time, that's effectively 25% more damage. Not quite, because it will technically be down more often than it will be up because of the internal cooldown. But anyway, it also gives curse immunity, which is kind of a cool. I think curses, are important to get reduction there. I used to run a flask with the suffix there, but anyway, trying to get these on the jewels is a good idea. You don't need necessarily 4 of them, but having curse immunity about half the time is very, very good. And then it also gives 20% less elemental damage taken for its duration. That is going to feed into the Phys taken as cold or lightning that I'm also doing. It's going to help me reduce a lot of damage. And it's really cool. It sets up a really cool dynamic where, half the time I'm sort of in retreat mode and half the time I'm in offense mode. And this, it does set up a really cool dynamic with the character where, with things like Windward and Soul Ascension, there are certain times when I'm better off standing my ground and fighting whatever's in my face, and there are certain times when I'm better off retreating. And figuring out that dynamic has actually been quite a fulfilling experience, this league, for me in the Tier 17 map, especially with the sort of meat sacks farm where I'm actually really engaged with the content, as opposed to just, off-screening everything, not really knowing what's going on. It's proven to be quite enjoyable. So that's why I really like the chest, is because it gives me a significant damage, less damage taken, significantly more damage done during a certain window of time. I can, double down on that with the Soul Ascension gloves and Windward, Wind Dancer, and Immortal Call will go off as a backup to help keep me alive in all of that in case I'm taking a little bit too much damage, which is often the case, and sometimes I die anyway. And it's fun to test the limits of the build as it can go. But anyway, that is essentially the full Monty of all the defensive layers I have currently my build. I think, I could be wrong. Please let me know in the comments below if I missed anything. Probably did. But anyway, that is going to conclude the Path of Building segment of the video. We're going to move into this little thing here. So you see I'm setting up a map. Now this is a antagonist mod, increased number of rares, plus Shaper Touched. And just a quick mention, today Shaper Touched was nerfed, so I know people are going to make comment in the description below. Yes, I'm aware of that. This was recorded before that, so that's why I'm running the map this way. And it's still a proper showcasing of how defensive the build is, because it's one of the scariest things in Tier 17 maps is a Shaper Touch map, especially as a character like this. Trying to jumpstart that sort of mapping experience can be difficult. So I'm showing you my evasion without anything up is currently that number. I'm triple cursed. That's why my resistances are under cap. You see on the right, the modifiers are there, and they're not too bad. They're pretty easy going. Really just about the curses. So one thing I'm trying to do, focus on, is building up Headhunter buffs, of course. So I see a rare. I'm praying I don't get Shaper Slammed, because there's Shaper Slam, there's Shaper Beams, there's Shaper Balls. 2 of them are hits. 2 of them are spell-based. And the beam is honestly the scariest one, especially when you're running Petrified Blood. You can see my life is half reserved there. The Divination Distillate is able to be on at all times because it has a window, fluttering window there between half life and 63% life. Currently leeching at all times, getting the extra damage there. Taking a Shaper Beam to the face, but I have already acquired 54 Headhunter buffs, so that helps. And yes, I totally admit, Headhunter buffs, out of all those different defensive layers I mentioned, Headhunter buffs, clearly the most powerful one. If you have like 50 plus Headhunter buffs, you can suddenly start taking a lot of extra incoming damage. But, you know, you hear from me, you hear from other people, it doesn't mean you just automatically survive everything. It used to, back in the day, Sentinel League especially, if I remember, was the league where Headhunter was the supreme leader of defensive layers. But things are much different now. And I'm going around trying to find the boss room. We're going to finish this video in just a second, but, you know, we're going deeper in the deli. I am actually confused right now. I'm not sure where the boss is. Realized I've been doubling back the wrong way. And we're going to go back up left. Trying not to kill too many monsters. Trying not to spawn too many altars, because I want to do them after the boss, because I want to get that highly coveted Divination Duplication altar, if possible. But here's the boss. Very, very rippy boss. If you're not loaded up with Headhunter buffs, 55 is okay. You can see I got a lot of damage. Again, this is in the Delirium. And so, obviously one unspoken defensive layer is killing more faster. That's clearly a very good defensive layer. But again, not the be-all, end-all. It's important to diversify some of your defenses. And then the map continues and goes on and on and on. And I'm not going to show you the whole map. I will inform you that I did not get a duplicated card of any major value, even though you got to see, if you caught it, that I do actually have Divination Duplication right now, currently in this map. But I'm going to go along and open the strong boxes, just fly through the beams. And the reason why I'm not keeled over dead is because, again, one last time, the combination of all those defensive layers I mentioned, combined with having some Headhunter buffs, combined with doing a lot of damage, giving a lot of recovery, and has allowed me, as an otherwise glass cannon archetype, just not keel over at the first sight of a monster in one of these cracked out Tier 17 maps. So again, I've had a lot of fun playing it, and yes, I'm fully aware this is like top 1 percentile gameplay that I'm showing you here, but it is the way. If you want to get to a level like this and do something like this, this is one way to do it. That's all I wanted to show you today. So I hope you're able to learn something new. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. That's going to be it for the video. I'll see you next time. And you can always come by live on Twitch and ask me once again how the heck I'm surviving all this. Because I'm sure that person's right around the corner. Now I got the resource I can give you guys.